As a context of that film, I want to quote E.O. Wilson, who said, famous biologist and philosopher also, and activist, in Oxford 2009, he says, the real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and it's terribly dangerous. And now we're approaching the point of crisis overall. And it's really funny, that was a long time ago. And now we're here and we're saying, okay, what is the future going to hold? And what does it mean? So in the film, you can see it at thegoodfuturefilm.com. I talk about why I think the future is better than we think, why we can have hope, why we have to just do a few things to make it right. And I'll explain that here in my film, and I look forward to discussing it with you afterwards. Many people have a view of the future that is kind of polarized. Either it's amazing, that's like more Silicon Valley style, right? I lived there for 17 years, I'm pretty familiar with that, and the dot-com boom, or, defensive, as people generally are more in Switzerland, for example, where I live, being more hesitant to go forward into that future. And really the situation is, as we can see it right now, is that I really believe that we have all of the tools that we need, science and technology, to make a great future. We're inventing stuff every week, solving major problems. I mean, it's basically science fiction becoming science fact, and I'll talk about that in a second. But what we're missing is the antidote of the tool, right, which is the telos, the Greek word, the wisdom, right? The purpose, the understanding, the collaboration. It's a term used by Aristotle when he talks about the final destination. And he'd like to speak about the fact that we like to look at the means a lot, but not at the end. And I think we have to look a lot more at the end and figure out where we want to go and what we want. So let's take a look at the tools that are coming towards us that are already here. I call them the game changers. Basically cloud, the Internet of Things, blockchain, 3D printing, quantum computing, genetic engineering. It is mind-boggling, all that stuff that's happening at the same time. And of course, none of that is just plain old there. It's exponential, like Moore's law, Metcalfe's law, Wright's law, and so on. It's converging the industries. It's basically the most powerful thing happening right now, becoming very, very real, reminding me sometimes of the good old Blade Runner #1, the flying taxi. That's here now. I spoke at IAA Mobility the other day, and somebody was demoing a flying taxi. So I really think we're going to see more change in the next 10 years than the previous 100 years. And that's not an overstatement. It's not a euphemism. It's basically all happening at the same time. We're entering the leap age. And COVID has really funneled this into even a faster acceleration now, basically because technology is everywhere now, starting with a beautiful Amazon Astro robo toy that just came out, or of course the Boston Dynamics dancing robots that you can see on YouTube. Basically, it's all happening now. Some of these are more like in demo stages, but we're clearly there to where science fiction is becoming science fact. And now we have to think further about all that stuff that's happening to us in a very quick time. The largest technological transformation in human history, with all of those things happening at the same time. New trillion-dollar economies, innovation platforms, autonomous vehicles, energy storage, the blockchain, genome sequencing. The list goes on, of course, with the exponential cost reduction trend of pretty much anything. Genome editing, batteries, LEDs, everything, right? The solar panel cost declining, battery cost declining and increasing in power, 3D printing of airplane engines, parts, and a new kind of meat. This is actually the most funny statistic here, showing that we're going to eat a lot more cultured meat and meat from the lab than we eat real meat in the near future. Maybe the future is vegetarian. And then we have here also this amazing thing that's happening around us with deep learning and machine learning that's providing us with all of the changes and fueling most of it. And the hype curve of climate change technology is also here. I mean, looking at this, the red dots are the 0 to 2 years, and they're everywhere now. EVs, ride sharing, and then the yellow dots are battery storage and fuel cells and so on. It's basically all here. When you're looking at this, it's pretty safe to say that we're in a sustainability revolution. The tools are getting there quickly, but the telos is kind of falling behind. right? The understanding, the wisdom to make it work. That is our biggest problem. It's not that we don't have the tools, right? So I think we can tackle most of the practical, scientific, technological challenges that on the sustainable development goals here. We can tackle most of those, but technology will not tackle societal, human, cultural, and political and policy issues. It probably makes them worse. Look how much Facebook has increased the problem of media rather than decreased it, because it's really efficient, right? That's what technology does. We have to take a more holistic view. This is going to be crucial to create a good future. We can't just say, well, it's going to be great because we can make lots of money with this product and we can work much faster, we can become superhuman. But the real question is it going to be good for us? Is it going to work for us in a larger way? What we have achieved so far is really this simple graph shows it really well from the Cooper Review and the Treasury. Produced capital has increased, right? Productivity, human capital a little bit, not much. But natural capital has completely tanked. And who's going to do well doing business in a broken down world? And that's a question I ask myself a lot. I think we're moving to a new paradigm here because we have to realize that the capitalism that we've had so far, not just the Milton Friedman capitalism, but even until now, is kind of unfit for this future. And then the question is, what else is there? What is sustainable capitalism, post-capitalism, neo-capitalism? Right? I think we have to think about the economic logic if we want to really tackle those large issues, because we are literally at a fork in the road moment. Buckminster Fuller, famous futurist, one of my mentors, indirectly speaking, he talked about this a lot, that we are essentially at a junction. And he talked about that 50 years ago, but now we really are, I think this is the fork in the road. And as we're moving into a future where it's basically going to be tackling climate change, tackling inequality, which is the cause of terrorism and crime and other really not so good things in our society, and tackling things like the AI arms race between China and the US and possibly even Russia. Right? How are we going to tackle this in the free market? Are we going to need more interference? And what exactly does that mean? Have we practiced this in the COVID times as to where this could go and what it means? I think we're moving into a new world, a new decade of new things. And I've collected 3 of them here in my work, basically the result of the COVID crisis. Big Blue, not IBM, but technology, big tech, big green, and what I call big purpose. Some people would call it big human. And I really think that there's also convergence of these sort of transatlantic camps now happening with the American concept of Big Blue. That's very, very American, of course. I lived in Silicon Valley for 17 years. That's where it all emanates from. And of course, China also now. But Europe is really about the big green. And maybe this is a good way, sort of German-American way of saying, well, big purpose, being a humanist, living in a collective society, maybe it's a good convergence of those 2 streams, right? So big tech, big green, big planet, and finally, some people would even call it big state, right? Because now the state is everywhere. I don't know, big state is probably not a good word. I call it big policy or big purpose. And the state is going to be absolutely everywhere, as it has been in the COVID crisis, because these are very complex issues. We're going to see a lot more regulation, carbon tax, and all these things. That's going to require a lot of wisdom. Maybe politics and wisdom is an antidote. I don't know, but I hope for that to be pointing a way forward into an interesting future. There's already lots of that happening, right? The Pandora Papers, the Business Roundtable discussion, right? The whole discussion about the vaccine patent waiver to get more vaccines out to people. The idea of basically creating net zero alliances for insurances and banks. It's happening left and right. People are moving into a new reality. And that reality means we want to have a good future, not just a well-off future, or not just a polarized future, right? So 3 points about that good future I want to go through, and then we'll talk about it a little bit later. So digitization, big blue, of course, and decarbonization, which is basically complete resetting of our current economy. That's going to all happen in the next decade. The end of oil is near. Well, of course, it won't be the total end, but as a business, yes. Total decarbonization enforced in really rapid ways in the next couple of decades, and reformation, which is basically changing our economic logic to think larger, to go beyond GDP. And that discussion again has been around a long time, but there's like a giant catalyst happening here in the COVID paradigm. And really, what's happening around us, we can safely say that digitization is kind of a no-brainer. Everybody's doing that now. That's kind of the blue part, right? And then this is a tough one, the decarbonization, but it's also going to create a multi-trillion-dollar industry with hundreds of millions of new jobs. Just read the World Economic Forum report. The toughest one is really reformation. To reform what stock markets are, how we perform, who gets dividends, how we get paid, right? A completely different logic. So a pivoting society is what we're up to, right, the next decade. And that pivoting is, again, only egged on by COVID, but climate change, financial issues, and ultimately, of course, the rewriting of capitalism, inequality, and the first real big pivot we're seeing, of course, in America right now. And that's painful, and many people may feel a little bit sarcastic about this. It's actually a pivot, but we can discuss later. But I think it's a great example. We're going to see another pivot happening in Germany now with a new government coming in. That's happening around the world, also, of course, in Poland and Czechoslovakia, many other places going in a similar direction. It's going to be quite interesting what happens here in the COVID rebound. I think basically this is what's happening, right? You take the globe, you shake up business, whether it's shipping or cruise ships or oil and gas or any business, transportation, mobility, healthcare, and the next decade will emerge new narratives, new priorities, and new rules. Great opportunity for all of you guys to get involved in this, and for the sort of German-American coalition of getting it right. That's going to be an interesting angle until we figure out how to exactly do this. So right now there's sort of three camps of this, right? Well, this is of course a polarized way of showing it, the sort of corporate capitalism of America, the social capitalism of Europe, and China. Well, we're not going to talk about China because China will be just a topic on its own for another 2 hours if I even go there. Importantly saying, that basically in the COVID crisis, we've seen an explosion of the tech giants and the sort of basically taken over the world kind of concept, both in market cap and in income. And that's going to continue as we're forming new rules about what they should or should not be doing, because clearly here's the challenge, right? We're moving into the upper quadrant on the right side of technology, which is basically artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, smart computer, Internet of Things, quantum computing, and of course blockchain and the the digital currency undertakings that are happening everywhere. There's lots of benefits and lots of risks, and we're going to have to really collaborate to figure this out. The only way forward, I think, is global hyper collaboration. That's the only ticket. And that's basically on top of all the science and technology that we're unfolding, right? That's the ticket to the good future. That requires us to think differently. And yeah, it's easy for me to say I lived in America for 17 years and I'm German, but I'm also Swiss now. So I kind of feel that way already. But I think that's the ticket to the future. We're going to see clearly United States of Europe emerging in the next decade. That sounds really, really fantastical right now, like far out, right? But that's coming, and we're going to see that becoming the ticket to our future, the global collaboration, because we know what happens when we do not have the telos, the wisdom, the purpose, the understanding, the openness to collaboration. You may have been there. I was 2 years ago in San Francisco, the wildfires sending clouds of smoke into the Bay Area. We've seen the statistics on global warming and what happens if China and India do the same thing that we have done in developed countries. The huge increase just the last 20 years, basically my life cycle as being in business and being out there has seen this enormous rise in CO2. And basically what's going to happen here with all of the unfolding threats, 500 million to 1 billion climate refugees, all moving to Europe and to America, moving up from there. And clearly we see a lot of people who are really worried about this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit hard on this one. So a lot of people are saying in this new Lancet Planetary Health Research, the future is frightening, right? See how many people think the future is frightening and that we have not taken care of the planet. That is not a good position to be in, because we should not go into the future being frightened. We have to understand what is better about it and how we can fix it. That brings me to Facebook. The recent Facebook example is a fantastic example of too much of a good thing and not enough oversight and too much hubris, as we're seeing basically Facebook becoming, I would say, toxic. That's a good word. I left Facebook as a as a user, not as a staff member 4 years ago. And really what's happening now is Facebook is shooting at democracy, is shooting at what it means to be a friend. It's totally corrosive to society. And there we're seeing really the sort of epitome of the issue when something is too good, too much of a good thing. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, of course, says technology can do great things, but it does not want to do great things. It doesn't want anything. This is going to be so important for our future. We have to decide what it wants, what it should be, what is ethical, what has value to us, not technology in itself. Right? And we can see what's happening around the web and all the debate about Facebook. This is symptomatic about the future that we're going to see. People want a better future, a holistic future, a future that works for everybody, not just for Facebook. Facebook makes about $100 million profit per day. Now think about that. And now, of course, they're going to have the metaverse, right? So welcome to the metaverse. And you heard about that. And well, now they're going to change their name, so everything will be fine. I think it will be called the Zuckiverse. But whatever it is, now we're facing this dilemma. How far are we going to go in this convergence of humans and machines, the singularity, the transhumanism? I think when the tools become the purpose, technology becomes the purpose, the religion, the drug maybe, the good future is endangered. And we have to be able to stay separate from this. And I think the more that we connect, the more we have to protect what makes us human. So I've suggested for years, and some people have taken it up, a thing called the Digital Ethics Council. And that's now in place in Singapore, in Denmark, and some other countries, and also regions and cities. But I think we should elevate that to what I call now the Humanity Futures Council, a council of the wise people, like Aristotle type people, that think about these issues and basically counsel us to do the right thing much better than the Facebook oversight board, I would hope. Something that we have to think about, because now we're moving into this future, we're surrounded by technology. It doesn't matter whether you're 65 or 75 or 15, it's everywhere. It's basically the Neo-Luvian man and woman. It's kind of like a new renaissance of humanity. So I really think we need to invest as much in humanity and what makes us human as we invest in technology. That goes for education too. Humanity, ethics, science, art, all that stuff together, as Steve Jobs liked to say, right? Art and technology creates the beautiful product. Our future is going to be in that combination of things, not in an either-or scenario. And very important for us humans, our ultimate job is going to be human, because everything else can be done by machines. What I call the androrhythms in my book, Technology versus Humanity: emotions, creativity, imagination, ethics, consciousness, values. We don't want machines to have consciousness. We want them to just be competent. Right? That will be plenty. We don't want them to be conscious. So in this future, here's a simple question. And I think that's a question for all of us, whether you're in business or you're studying or you're about to graduate or in government. And how will you create the good future? The good future for ourselves, of course, and for our children, our grandchildren. What kind of ancestor are we going to be? I think this idea of people, planet, purpose, and prosperity is central to that answer. And that's going to inform politics and science and technology going forward in a very, very fast way. So I encourage you to watch my movie. It's very short, it's 12 minutes, has beautiful footage from Lanzarote. And I hope the good future will be upon us in reality in the next decade. So thanks very much for your time and your attention. And now let's have a conversation.
Thank you very much for these interesting insights, Gerd. You spoke about the fact that our technologies are from the future. Science fiction is becoming science fact, but our system is unfit for the future. How do we actually move into that next step of reformation? Can you make that a bit more concrete?
Well, the good news is that because we have all the tech and the science, we can solve the things that are really tough, disease, water, food, energy. Right? But when we solve them, then we have to make the benefits of it, we have to make them available to everybody. So it can't be that productivity increases and a lot of money and resources accumulates as a result, but then everybody else who's not part of that process just stands there wondering. That's kind of what we have with technology now. So it's going to have to be a more equal collective system of how we're going to attribute the resources. Right now we're spending roughly $6.5 trillion a year in fossil fuel subsidy for people to drive cheaper. For example, in Indonesia, to get cheaper gas and to drive. Imagine if we took that money and we put it into green energy. Imagine if we had new rules that said all the new mopeds have to be electric only, and we would subsidize that, right? Imagine what kind of shift we're going to see there. I mean, the tens of trillions of dollars that we have printed to deal with COVID on a worldwide level have not really caused inflation yet. We're going to need to print hundreds of trillions, so to speak, or take them from other places to solve the climate crisis. Otherwise, there's no point. Right? And I think the money is there. Now it's just about making that a priority and making some tough decisions. And of course, this is not, it can't be a degrowth agenda, like saying that we're not going to grow and we're going to go back to doing things completely differently and not fly. And that's not going to happen. Right? It needs to remain a growth agenda, but a sustainable growth agenda. And that's what companies like Unilever and others have already pioneered. So this is the important part. It's a combination of what we're pushing for as people, as population citizens, what businesses are doing to get ahead of this, like the Business Roundtable, and then what governments are asking for and mandating, like the corporate tax law. Right? It's a combination of those things. It's not either or. That's going to get us to that future.
Thanks for mentioning all of this. I want to give you another question regarding the resources that you mentioned. What do you think about the topic of resource scarcity in the context of overpopulation? Can we humans expand indefinitely, or is there a limit to that we will reach at some point?
Well, it is an issue, but not a major issue. We are actually slowing down in growth. We're not at the Club of Rome numbers that they had predicted, and people are moving to cities. So yeah, we're going to swell to 10 or 11 billion, but not to 20. And our technology will make it possible to create water and food, for example, in a high rise or in a meat lab that creates millions of pounds of edible, high quality organic meat, so to speak, every day. We can solve all of that. And on top of that, of course, we are becoming essentially a spacefaring species. I think that's a little bit optimistic to say that's going to happen in the next 20 years. But once we have fusion energy, we'll go. We'll send the AI first. Maybe Elon will go first. I don't know. So I think it's an issue, overpopulation. But on the other hand, I would say it's also human to have kids and to think of growing in that direction as well. So I'm not entirely sure that's a major problem. It is a challenge, right? But we're pretty much on the way of dealing with that challenge, including, of course, in developing countries where people move to big cities. Then they have automatically a lot less kids. And so all of these issues are somewhat being balanced a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think especially with the point of international collaboration, that's a very good point you made. But in addition to the COVID crisis we're facing right now, we also see a crisis of collaboration, especially in the past years, with closed borders, nationalization, etc. So how do we get back to focus on the collaboration part and just really work together?
Yeah, it's kind of a polarized view. I think in many cases you could say the collaboration has sometimes failed us, or that we weren't fast enough, like the European Commission did not act fast enough on the face masks, on the vaccinations and all that kind. But generally speaking, we collaborated and created a vaccine in 12 months. And the pharma companies took a backseat. Now they want to cash in, of course. Now we have a different discussion, right? But basically, it can be seen in both ways. We have learned that we must collaborate. Otherwise, an existential threat can really get ahead of us. And the pandemic wasn't, it wasn't unpredicted. Larry Brilliant predicted it, and Bill Gates predicted it. We said we didn't want to spend the money on preparing, right? So the collaborative part, I think COVID is showing us that collaboration is key. Not collaborating, not working together to solve large problems will make them worse. It will catch us unaware, and it will cost us dearly, like this pandemic has already cost us. But much more than that, think about basically COVID-19 is a test run for climate change. So if we have eventually 20 million people dying from COVID, yeah, it's a test run in the sense of, we're talking about hundreds of millions here, right? and not so far away of a future. So that is enforcing collaboration. You know what Winston Churchill said about America? He said, as a tangent, he said, you can always trust Americans to do the right thing after they tried everything else. That was, of course, in the 40s. And I say the same about humans. You can always trust humans to actually do the right thing after they've tried many other things. And I think we're actually good at collaboration. We're not evil. You know, we should read the book called Humankind from Rutger Bregman that talks about how this is the survival of the kindest, not the meanest.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we're going.
So, could you elaborate a little more on your prediction with respect to the United States of Europe? Faced with the rise of nationalism and anti-EU sentiments all across Europe, and in the context of Brexit, how do you believe this vision will overcome the utopian stage?
Well, you know, anybody that's watching what is happening or what has happened with the Brexit will think twice of going down that road. That's for sure. And the European elections are showing that this is not a topic, right? Not in Czechoslovakia, not in Germany, definitely not in France anymore, right? Not even in Greece anymore. And the Italians have just gotten themselves 240 billion euros to rebuild. So, you know, I think that basically what is happening, we are realizing that the United States of Europe is the least of the bad alternatives. Yeah, everybody wants to be, you know, big by themselves and be independent, but the future isn't about independence because we're talking about large issues here. You know, when you live in France and you have nuclear power plants there, and just across the border you're in Germany, you're 50 miles away from the possible accident, right? I mean, we are forced to collaborate. So imagine what would happen if we were to collaborate. I'm speaking with my German passport now, not my Swiss passport. If we were to collaborate on security, which means cybersecurity mostly in the future, right? How many trillions we could save if we were to actually collaborate, right? How many trillions we could save when we collaborate on energy, which is now the plan of the European Commission, the Green Deal, right? And so it's not just monetary, it's also quite clear that as a player between America and China, that's what it comes down to really, until Africa gets up to power, then, you know, we're going to need to be strong and hold our own ground as to what we want. And you know, Europe is a continent of humanists, right? And this is what we want. We want to stay human. I don't know, you can't really say that about China. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say, right? But so that's a difficult discussion, but we're going to need to be strong, and we can only do that together. And I see start in this in every possible direction. The Commission is bloated, it's slow, but it does great work on the key issues like AI, like data protection, and it's actually the leader in many global initiatives on these really tough topics. And you can, in fact, say that many people in America are trying to follow the agenda of the European Commission by importing that as a concept. So I'm much more optimistic about that, and I think also that eventually Switzerland will become part of that as well. So yeah, I can see that unfolding in the next decade pretty quickly.
Thank you. I agree with you. Sounds really interesting. So let me go back to your presentation for a quick question. One key point in your presentation is political. One key point in your presentation is political will to actually implement like holistical changes. How do you get politicians on board? We've continuously seen lack of willingness of policymakers when it comes to putting humans first and addressing the threats of climate change or implementing regulations against big tech or private corporations.
Yeah, there's two things about this. First, Gandhi once said that when you have 5% of the population behind a major issue and they're ready to go and speak out about it, make noise about it, non-violently, of course, as he said, right? When you have 5% on the road doing that, then things really change. And this is what we're gathering now. 5%, yeah, we're beyond the 5% for climate change. We're beyond the 5% for legislating technology that is overbearing and corrosive to society. And the second thing is that, you know, as we're nearing the sort of exponential curve, you know, people are realizing that what looked like a minor problem 5 years ago is a huge problem in 5 years, like face recognition. You know, so you have companies that sell a database that can recognize your social media picture and then basically filter you into categories and suggest you for employment or not. Right? And the stuff that was unthinkable is normal now. We have to keep in mind that really what is happening here is that technology used to be over-promising and it couldn't deliver enough, like AI, but now it's all actually happening. Right? I mean, we're actually moving to where it becomes possible. Even the brain uploading that Elon Musk wants to do, a possibility, not now, but in a decade or so. Right? So I think that's going to force a lot of change when enough people are asking, and also when there's a business model. The business model of being corrosive and abuse is not a business model anymore. That is a Facebook model, right? That will just not work anymore. And also the business model of doing bad things, making money, making good money doing bad things, like oil companies, that's also ending, right? Because there are the side effects are clear. So I think politicians are getting wise to this. People are getting wise to this. And of course, in America, everything is very polarized, big problem. But around the world, we have a lot of initiatives. I mean, look at New Zealand, look at Iceland, look at what's happening in Norway now, right? And again in Germany and everywhere. So I think there's lots of indication that politicians are listening. And I would also say, as a prediction, kind of, that a lot of people will take action by pulling their investments, from divesting from funds that are not doing the right thing, right? Stopping being a customer for example, a lot of people will pull their ads from Facebook, right? And companies will pull their ads from Facebook because it's not working. So that's going to create a huge wave of pressure to make change that we see around, and that's been well practiced in COVID. And that's going to hit us like a hammer, like, for example, a carbon tax for flying on an airplane. That will become mandatory. And that's basically the kind of ticket for the future that will hurt, but it's existential.
Okay. Well, you state that hyper collaboration is needed to find the purpose of technological advancements. In what way will Europe and America have to sacrifice their views in regards to human rights violations, like e.g. in China or Russia, in order to find a compromise? How do we deal with these harsh differences to enable collaboration?
Yeah, these differences are big, but the reality is dawning to Russia and to China and to any other country that wants to be part of a global good. Right? There is no game left to do your own game. Right? I mean, climate change is only the first step of this. Imagine if we have a country that has intelligent systems that are generally intelligent, so-called AGI, as Ray Kurzweil talks about a lot in his books. That's probably 20 years away, the possibility. Then that truly becomes like a nuclear bomb. Worse, because it's just code, right? So as we've learned in a nuclear arms race, we had 2 bombs, and that triggered 15 years of discussions, and then we had a treaty. And my hunch is that we're going to see a lot of issues with abuse of technology, abuse of data, maybe even large-scale accidents or disasters based on intelligent systems not working or failing us, and then we take action to stay in the loop. But basically, I'm optimistic that we can find compromises. We always have. And the nuclear treaties were not perfect, but they have worked. Right? And we're going to need very similar treaties for genetic engineering and for AGI, and of course, first of all, for climate change. So I think there is a realization, even by the countries who are on a slightly different agenda, and that's actually sometimes very hard to say about China, in my view. Personally, I have a hunch that there may be a sort of the end of the old style communism in China in the next decade as well, even though that would be a daring statement, I guess. But now we're all feeling the pressure that we only have one planet, one resource, one system. Right? And that pressure is going to increase. So I think that's going to be quite a good reason, as we're going to see maybe in Glasgow, where Putin, for example, has said he's not going. He's going to zoom in and then zoom out and do his own thing, I suppose. But hey, I think this is it's a long process, but we're getting there.
Thank you very much, Gerd. I think with regards to the time, this was the last question. I would again like to thank you very much for this interesting and inspiring speech. We are looking forward to the future, and there's another quote that I like a lot. It's let's not forget, the future always begins now. But I would love to leave you. Do you have any last words to tell the audience?
Well, I would end with a quote from William Gibson, one of my favorite science fiction authors, who said, "The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed." And if we can distribute it a little bit better, I think we'll be better at having and creating the good future.
Okay. Thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
Please join us to our next session about the future of democracy.
Thank you. See you later.
Perfect. See ya.
Live long and prosper.